The future and success of America is not in this Constitution, but in the laws of God upon which this Constitution is founded. Oppressors can tyrannize only when they achieve a standing army, an enslaved press, and a disarmed populace. If our nation is ever taken over, it will be taken over from within. Crisis is the rallying cry of the tyrant. The purpose of the Constitution is to restrict the majority's ability to harm a minority. The ultimate authority resides in the people, and that if the federal government got too powerful and overstepped its authority, then the people would develop plans of resistance and resort to arms. If man is not fit to govern himself, how can he be fit to govern someone else? Temporary deviations from fundamental principles are always more or less dangerous. When the first pretext fails, those who become interested in prolonging the evil will rarely be at a loss for other pretexts. It is a universal truth that the loss of liberty at home is to be charged to the provisions against danger, real or pretended, from abroad. The right of the citizens to bear arms in defense of themselves and the state shall not be questioned. Knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives. I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments by those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations. If tyranny and oppression come to this land, it will be in the guise of fighting a foreign enemy. A president is impeachable if he attempts to subvert the Constitution. Democracy was the right of the people to choose their own tyrant. Where an excess of power prevails, property of no sort is duly respected. No man is safe in his opinions, his person, his faculties, or his possessions. The advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only guardian of true liberty. A people armed and free, forms a barrier against the enterprises of ambition and is a bulwark for the nation against foreign invasion and domestic oppression. It will be of little avail to the people that the laws are made by men of their own choice if the laws be so voluminous that they cannot be read, or so incoherent that they cannot be understood. Wherever there is interest and power to do wrong, wrong will generally be done. I cannot undertake to lay my finger on that article of the Constitution which granted a right to Congress of expending, on objects of benevolence, the money of their constituents. No nation could preserve its freedom in the midst of continual warfare. The means of defense against foreign danger have been always the instruments of tyranny at home. The advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only guardian of true liberty. I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations. Philosophy is common sense with big words. The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. The truth is that all men having power ought to be mistrusted. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Equal laws protecting equal rights, the best guarantee of loyalty and love of country. Americans have the right and advantage of being armed, unlike the citizens of other countries whose governments are afraid to trust the people with arms. I cannot undertake to lay my finger on that article of the Constitution which granted a right to Congress of expending, on objects of benevolence, the money of their constituents. Charity is no part of the legislative duty of the government. History records that the money changers have used every form of abuse, intrigue, deceit, and violent means possible to maintain their control over governments by controlling money and its issuance. No nation could preserve its freedom in the midst of continual warfare. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. Democracy is the most vile form of government. Knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to be their own governors, must arm themselves with the power knowledge gives. Where an excess of power prevails, property of no sort is duly respected. No man is safe in his opinions, his person, his faculties, or his possessions. Liberty may be endangered by the abuses of liberty as well as by the abuses of power. All men having power ought to be distrusted to a certain degree. As a man is said to have a right to his property, he may be equally said to have a property in his rights. The operations of the federal government will be most extensive and important in times of war and danger, those of the state governments, in times of peace and security. Let me recommend the best medicine in the world: a long journey at a mild season through a pleasant country in easy stages. The means of defense against foreign danger historically have become the instruments of tyranny at home. Knowledge will forever govern ignorance. Of all the enemies to public liberty, war is perhaps the most to be dreaded because it comprises and develops the germ of every other. Liberty may be endangered by the abuse of liberty, but also by the abuse of power. If tyranny and oppression come to this land, it will be in the guise of fighting a foreign enemy. Religious bondage shackles and debilitates the mind and unfits it for every noble enterprise, every expanded prospect. The Senate ought to be so constituted as to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority. The censorial power is in the people over the government, and not in the government over the people. Experience is the oracle of truth. If we are to be one nation in any respect, it clearly ought to be in respect to other nations.